Testing, are you there, Shakur?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, all right. Greetings. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Happy Sunday to everybody that's listening and watching today. And we are so happy you have decided to spend an hour of your Sunday afternoon with myself and Shakura. And you are witnessing a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And today our topic is going to be Hollywood and destroying African militancy. And again, we are so happy to have you here. I just want to full transparency and disclosure. So I'm traveling today, so there's going to be background noises because I'm in a public place. So please forgive that. I'll try to work through it when it's my turn to present, but apologize for any background noise that you hear. You know, you all understand it's a capitalist system, so anything that can represent making money off of people is always going to be going on around you. So thank you again for joining us. As always, we start by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and that this is their land that we sit on today. And when we say that, we don't just mean some baseless land recognition and then we just go on business as usual. What we are saying is that these folks have just right to this land that we're on in the Western Hemisphere, and they must get their land back. They must get it back. And our efforts are designed to facilitate anything we can possibly do to assist them in getting their land back. So stop saying whose streets, our streets. These are not your streets. This land belongs to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and no one else. And we also always acknowledge our African ancestors who have fought militantly and have fought so in such a dignified fashion for us since the very first slave raiders arrived in Africa up to present day. So we are always thankful for them and respectful to their outstanding contributions, because without them, we would not be here today. So thank you for all of those who came before us. And again, thank you all who are joining us today. And we'll start with our brief introductions. Ajamu here, longtime organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party on 3 continents in the Caribbean. I've done work for the party in all those places and will continue to do that for as long as I have breath available in my body. And joining me, as always, every week, we're going on 50 straight weeks of doing this program. And Shakura is here, my daughter. She grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute. And what that means, you all, if you don't know what that means, is that this person that you're about to hear from never grew up celebrating any of these people's holidays. She didn't grow up celebrating Miss Christ. She didn't grow up celebrating Thanksgiving. She didn't grow up celebrating the 4th of July or 4th of July. She never experienced any of those backward concepts. So, you know, she just was raised in a totally different foundation. Respect for indigenous people, respect for non-men, being completely anti-patriarchy, being against, being anti-homophobic, being anti-capitalist, being anti-white supremacy. So this is her upbringing. And so I'm just so proud to do this work with her every day and just happy that, you know, we're here to do that. So want to say that, and again, apologize for all the background noise. And then the objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, again, is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. And if you want to understand a little more about that, just look at the book on the right, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which was written 51 years ago by or 52 years ago, I'm sorry, by our founder, Kwame Nkrumah. And what that book entails, you all, is Nkrumah's strategy for achieving one unified socialist Africa. And what he calls for in the handbook is for all Pan-African revolutionary formations on the ground in Africa to unite all those that agree with that objective, one unified socialist Africa. So our work has been carrying out that strategy. So you see before you some of the logos of some of the organizations that we have built those relationships with and continue to build and maintain them, who agree that one unified socialist Africa is, as Kwame Nkrumah said, the objective which once achieved will bring about freedom for Africans everywhere on earth. So the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, or what you call South Africa, is an example of that. The African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, or PAIGC, the Democratic Party of Guinea, the Party of Sekou Touré, the Azanian People's Organization, and Azania, or again, what you call South Africa, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Zimbabwe Movement of Pan-African Socialists, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone, and so on and so forth, many organizations that agree with this objective. And we continue to build with them to move towards our Pan-Africanist objective. We have chapters worldwide, and we have relationships with other liberation movements, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, the Irish Republican Socialist National Liberation Movement, the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, obviously the Filipino National Liberation Movement. So again, we thank you for joining us for this critical topic today, Hollywood and destroying African militancy. And to get us started, I will turn it over, as always, to Shakura.
Thank you so much, Daddy. Greetings, everyone. We hope that you are somehow maintaining a positive health, however that looks for you. So self-health, mental health, collective health, socialist health, however you want to define that. We just hope that you are finding a way to stay what you define as healthy. And why is that important? It's important for a couple of reasons, but most importantly, we can't allow you, or we can't expect you, I should say, to be able to do this work of deconstructing capitalism if you yourself are not ready to do the work. And a lot of times your health describes the state that you are in, to be able to be committed to the work, to be committed to the drive, and committed to some of the hardship and some of the pain that comes with deconstructing capitalism. So as I said before, we hope that you are in good health, however you see fit for that to be. And we thank you so much for joining us for the, did you say the 50th week? That is outstanding. You all are incredible. That means that we are seriously organizing everywhere across the world and doing what needs to be done. That's outstanding. Okay, so to get us started, it is very important that we need to be extremely clear. Hollywood today is still, without question, the primary propaganda mechanism for the US capitalist empire. Through its never-ending movies and television programs, content produced from Hollywood, Los Angeles, the United States, provides imagery, analysis, fantasy, and role modeling to millions of people on Earth on a daily basis, 24/7, 365. The average cost for a movie today is upwards of $150 million. Through any model, that figure equates to the annual income of thousands upon thousands of people. In other words, Hollywood has been for decades and remains today the chief information source for certainly the majority of people in the United States and the entire planet. For the most part, people's perception of the police and military, for example, is widely shaped based on depictions of those institutions in movies and television shows. And since most people do not study or read anything beyond headlines, titles, and short articles, the majority of people understand about history derives from what they view in movies and television shows produced by who? You guessed it, through this industrial propaganda network, of which the primary model is what is produced from Hollywood. We should not be confused into believing that Hollywood is producing material that is objective and innocent. This is not to buy into the long-held conspiracy theories about deeply rooted agendas around mind control. There are plenty of productions being produced from Hollywood that promote positive messaging. Take, for example, the original Alien movie series starting in 1979, boldly introduced a strong lead woman character and strong women leaders backed by a subtle yet present anti-corporate message. The original, quote, Night of the Living Dead movie in 1968 introduced concepts never before seen in movies, such as the African lead character aggressively asserting their leadership over Europeans. There are many other such examples, but the point here is to illustrate that overall, by and large, Hollywood has served the purpose of ensuring that the dominant message, even when women and colonized people are shown in a semi-positive light, is always to make sure this capitalist power structure is upheld and protected. In other words, of course, there are examples of bad cops, i.e., quote, Training Day, but overall, the fundamental messaging coming from Hollywood is that police and the US military are the good people, and that they are here to ensure capitalism, the only viable way of life, is preserved. And even if there is a bad apple like Denzel in quote Training Day, that's an abomination. And the Ethan Hawke character is there in that movie to represent the cop who upholds this system of injustice. This always subtle message is the capitalism is always validated and that there is no realistic suggestion ever made to leave the door open that something beyond this empire is possible. Next slide, please. Of particular interest is the evolution of African Black themed Hollywood productions over the last 50 years in particular. Originally, the explosion of African movies in the 1970s, known as the quote Blaxploitation movie era, end quote, produced often cruelly made movies average budgets of between a couple of $100,000 to a couple of $1 million. That upheld many anti-African stereotypes, but these movies, heavily influenced by the Black Power movement, often showed uncontrolled African rage and organization against the power structure. Movies like, quote, Shaft, end quote, openly courted African revolutionary organizations, flawed as they were, as the winners in the movie. And this reality spread to even mainstream Hollywood movies like Clint Eastwood's, quote, Dirty Harry, end quote, movie series which depicted African militant community groups. The reality of the 70s is non-existent today. Even with African filmmakers and directors like Spike Lee, Ava DuVernay, and Regina King, the movies that are producing always go to great lengths to ensure any type of militancy that isn't checked and approved by the power structure is discredited and or completely ignored and written out of the script. So again, it needs to meet with the status quo of protecting capitalism. If it is doing just that, then it is what we would call socially accepted in the world in the eyes of Hollywood producers. So if you are protecting the status quo as a movie director, then your movie is more likely to have the funding to back it so that you can do what you need to do to shoot it and to make it. But when you create movies that discredit that status quo, that's where we start to see them as not available or ignored, or we start to learn that there are moments in time that have been, quote, written out of script because they're not maintaining that status quo or that power structure that capitalism is the only viable system. This is true even when the recent popular depiction of movies depicting actual historical events in our movements, such as, quote, Malcolm X, Selma, A Night in Miami, and Harriet, end quote. What we mean is the actual histories have been changed in these movies to reflect an alternate reality. Can you all just take a moment to think about that? These movies have been changed, giving us a different idea of what actually happened, which is despicable to say the least, and also contributes to the confusion that we have going on nowadays, which is probably to some extent why people think that we are not our ancestors, because they don't understand that in fact we are, because all they do is rely on media, which is telling them lies, to tell them about who they are, instead of going and finding it in a book where it might actually be some truth to that. So I want us to think about how it was previously stated that the danger of this, so believing that capitalism is the only viable system, is that most of our people are not studying who they are. They're not studying their history. They're not studying the history before them. They're not studying their ancestors, and they're not studying other oppressed people's histories to understand some correlations that are happening, especially if they're relying on Hollywood to teach them about themselves. So because our people are not studying our history independently from what Hollywood is producing, it is in essence that Hollywood movies about our history have become the primary vessel for how our history is told. As a result, the move to the right, you can see from many African people, either in the West, Europe, or Africa, etc., should not be separated from the propaganda being generated from Hollywood that repeats the message that our objective is the integration of our people into this capitalist system. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakura. And so again, for those of you who just joined us, I'm in transit, so there's going to be a lot of noise behind me. I'm really going to try to work through it, so please pardon that. But just to build on what Shakura just talked about, we want to speak specifically about how militancy is diminished through cinema and why that happens. Why is militancy diminished? And what does it look like when that happens? So if we want to, investigate what we're talking about, like look at the picture there. And I know a lot of you probably saw that movie, Queen and Slim. And that movie, I think, is a classic example of the point that we are attempting to make right here. Because if you didn't see the movie, if you don't remember it, and if you saw it and you don't remember it, that's probably a good thing. But what happened in that movie is that, these two here in the picture are pulled over by a European police, and the typical interaction occurs, and the European Gestapo ends up being shot and killed, and they're on the run. And so, the whole movie is about their initially very contentious relationship with one another, because they had just really met and had one date with each other and didn't really know each other. And then, they're trying to figure out how to survive while they're being pursued by, every element of the capitalist system. And so the way the movie ends, of course, is, as you can predict, even if you haven't seen it, they get captured and they're blown away by the police. And, the African that snitched on them and set them up to be captured is rewarded with a financial reward. And so our point is that this is really the type of message that Hollywood consistently pumps towards our people. And that message is that there's no way we can win if we decide to stand up and challenge this system. And if those of us who are insane enough to want to try to do that, then the only way that we could ever do it is on an individual basis, like the people in this film. Like there's no movie showing us organizing collectively against this system. You can't name one movie that shows African people organizing against the capitalist system and being successful at doing it. That movie is never going to happen, you all. So the model that they want you to focus on is that whenever we individualistically try to do something against this system, the system will prevent us from succeeding and will destroy us in the process. So that message that's coming out is standing up against this capitalist system means death and defeat. Every single time for us, every single time, that's what it means. And even if they try to, even if there's a movie that does depict some organized efforts by our people to engage and struggle, like the Deacons for Defense movie, which illustrates the actual Deacons for Defense, which a lot of us don't really know anything about, because again, Hollywood is promoted, in history in this backward society has promoted this notion that we never had any agency as a people. We never stood up and fought for ourselves. And when we were brutalized and terrorized, we just accepted it and turned the other cheek. That's exactly what they want us to believe. So they don't ever tell us about groups like the Deacons for Defense, which were former US military veterans who formed a defense network to defend civil rights workers in the 1960s in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. That's what the Deacons did. And the Deacons were not a passive group, y'all. As many people who were hurt and or killed in the civil rights movement for standing up to us, those numbers would have been significantly higher were it not for groups like the Deacons for Defense. You need to definitely understand that. And the Deacons, again, were never passive. You know, the Deacons shot numerous Ku Klux Klan members who confronted African people. You don't know that. You never heard of that. In Alabama, one deacon shot a Klansman in the face, and you didn't know that because they are never going to tell you that, because they don't want you to get the idea that that's probably a pretty good way to stand up against racist white supremacists. So even if they do make a film about groups like the Deacons, like they did with this film that starred Forrest Whitaker, they, as Shakur mentioned, they always make sure to change the narrative. Like they don't show the Deacons as they actually were, a militant group that stood up to protect our people with arms by any means necessary. Instead, like this movie, they just show us kind of, you know, getting together and deciding we wanted to, you know, at least be able to defend ourselves. And then when the moment of truth comes, we, at the end of the movie, the crescendo, just like in Queen and Slim, the crescendo is we get blown away by the police. Well, in Deacons for Defense, the crescendo is we stand up as they're doing in the picture there, but nothing happens. We stand down eventually, and the oppression against us, of course, still continues. You know, it's never going to be a situation where we actually end up winning. So this is something just to understand, you know, for us never to forget that they're not going to ever show us being victorious, and that the underlying message there is that because we can never win against the capitalist system, the best thing for us to do is not even try. Instead, you know, just get you a good job, get you a house, you know, get you go on vacation once a year. Don't go to Africa when you go on vacation, go to Europe, you know, do that, and be happy that, you know, you can just, if you can just um, believe in symbolism, then that's the best we can do. You know, if we can get one African in one position in the bourgeoisie system, then that's progress for us collectively. Even though the masses of people are going backwards, we got one person in the White House, so that just must mean that we're moving forward. And you just have to believe that, and you have to believe that that represents progress that we're going to make. And there's really no possible way we can ever expect to do better than that kind of tokenism. And that's the message that comes out through every institution in this society, whether it's churches, whether it's mosques, whether it's schools, whether it's the workplace, and yes, whether it's the entertainment industry. That's the constant and consistent message that they're throwing out to us. And this is something that we definitely want to expose and blow up, because this is not indicative of how people get free. You know, no people anywhere in history have ever gotten free by believing that the only rules, the only conditions in which they can struggle from are those that are provided by their oppressors. You can't name one people who have gotten free playing under that kind of curriculum. That's a curriculum. The only thing that curriculum is designed to do is keep us oppressed for another 528 years. So the next question about all of this is, why does this happen, and who's behind it? Like, who's specifically behind it? And you know, we don't believe in conspiracy theories. We're not advancing a conspiracy theory. You know, what we do believe is principled and consistent political education. And so when we study our history, we can tell you with unwavering evidence who is behind this effort to squash African militancy and to use Hollywood produced content to assist in that process. So, you know, if you think about it, like everyone here is familiar with Dragnet. It's a, you know, quote unquote iconic series about these two, Friday and the other clown in there from the 1960s, and they're doing police work. And the show, if you've never seen it, it carries out like a police log. They have a narrator, and the narrator is talking about the cases that they're going to investigate and what happens. And they're always the good guys. They always treat everybody respectfully. You know, there's never any sign of anything except utmost respect and courage. And then, you know, that's what they do. And so the question is, like, where did this concept come from? And what we want to make sure people understand about the history here is that during the 1960s, the United Snakes was engaged in a war in Vietnam. And there was a tremendous anti-war movement that was led by Africans, by the way. I know it's not ever talked about like that, but the main slogan of that war was hell no, we won't go. And that slogan was given to the anti-war movement by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Those were the words of Kwame Ture, who was formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. Hell no, we won't go. And so this anti-war movement generated such division against that war in this country, because of course, like all the wars this country fights, there's no legitimate and justifiable reason for why they're doing it. They, you know, the propaganda they use is that we're there in Vietnam to fight communism, but that's of course not why they were there. They were there to ensure that U.S. capitalist political and economic interests were maintained. The geopolitical interests in Southeast Asia, which were extremely delicate because of the development of China after their revolution, and then Vietnam and what Vietnam was doing, spreading to Laos and Cambodia, and then also North Korea, what had happened there with their revolution. So that was the geopolitical element, and then the economic element was the vast rubber reserves in Vietnam. So that's why they went to war in Vietnam, just like they went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan over oil and geopolitical interest there. That's what it was. It had nothing to do with freedom and creating freedom for anybody. And if you believe that, then you should just go to Disneyland, because that's a fantasy tale. So who is behind this? Like, who creates this reality and uses this propaganda to spread this message of crushing African militancy? Well, if you investigate this, what you will find is that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Central Intelligence Agency, they contribute millions of dollars towards the development of television shows and movies. They started doing it in the 60s because of this anti-war movement I just talked to you about. And they understood that they needed to change people's thinking and create a reality where people, like they did in the 50s, looked up to federal police agencies, looked up to local police departments. And, you know, up until the 50s, this was the case. G-men, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, were considered heroes, the untouchables, right? Elliot Ness, you know, the FBI were heroes. But then in the 60s, this changed. And because of the exposure of the FBI's illegal, immoral, and terroristic tactics against African liberation organizations like the Republic of New Africa, the Black Panther Party, and the American Indian Movement, and all of these organizations, people's perceptions of these agencies begin to change, and they begin to have a negative interpretation of these organizations in the late 60s. So this precipitated the FBI, CIA, et cetera, getting into the film business and the television business and using their vast resources, which you and I pay for, because we fund these backward terrorist organizations, using those to create a positive propaganda image for police agencies and the US military. So Dragnet, this television show, is an example of that. If you look at a Dragnet, all you have to do is look at an old episode of Dragnet. If you don't have a television network close to you that shows those, then you can go on YouTube and watch episodes. I know this because I've done it. And if you look at the credits, you'll see that they thank the Federal Bureau of Investigation for underwriting. So they funded this. So the whole point of this was to create an image of police that they were positive, they were beneficial to the community, and they would never do anything to hurt the community. And if anytime the police did anything to hurt you, it's because you were doing something you weren't supposed to be doing. And that was the whole purpose of that. And if you look at the original SWAT series, which produced the movie, the Samuel L. Jackson movie that most of you have seen, but there was a television show in the 70s that had Robert Urich and Steve Forrest, I think it was his name, and these people that you see in the picture there. And SWAT was depicted, special weapons and tactics. They were depicted as the super police force that would be called in to address any problems that threaten society. And so they were the superheroes who would come in and solve this problem. But what most people didn't know is that the SWAT team evolved out of the LA Police Department, the LAPD. And the first time you ever saw a SWAT team was on December 8th, 1969 in Watts, Los Angeles, or towards the Watts section in South Los Angeles, when this special weapons and tactics team was released on that community, African community, to combat the Black Panther Party. So make no mistake about it, because most of the organisms that exist in police departments, not only throughout this country, but throughout the world today, come from either LAPD or Zionist Israel, or one of two or three entities around the world that have really perfected the art of repression. And so the SWAT team at that time was their latest invention towards repression against the African liberation movement. And so they developed the tactics of swinging on the ropes and flying through windows and all the things that these terrorists do. And they attacked the Black Panther Party on December 8th, 1969, attacked their office. And because of the skills of people like Geronimo G. Jaga, that warrior, rest in power, who trained the Black Panther Party branch in LA to defend their office by putting sandbags up on the walls and making it difficult to shoot into the office because of his experience as a Vietnam vet, they were not able to murder the members of the Black Panther Party as they did 4 days before that in Chicago with Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. But what that did do is put on live television the SWAT team assaulting the African community. And of course, after that, SWAT police departments all around the country began to develop their own SWAT teams. And now it's a standard thing. And this television show, and ultimately the movies with LL Cool J and Samuel L. Jackson, were designed to normalize the existence of SWAT teams as these superhero police that were there to keep the people safe, when in reality, the whole purpose of creating a SWAT team was to terrorize our African liberation organizations. There was no other purpose behind that. So it's important to understand that, again, the SWAT television show, like Dragnet, like Adam 12, like all of them, was financed by the FBI. And again, all you have to do is look at the credits of the show and you can see that. And so it's also important to understand, this part of de-escalating militancy, and that, using art propaganda and content to de-escalate militancy and to send the message to us that, we just need to just focus on fitting into this system. We do not need to be out here trying to organize ourselves to overthrow the system that's been built and is maintained on our backs. That's a bad idea. That's what they're trying to convince you of. And all these other dysfunctional ideologies that are promoted through Hollywood, anything at all to keep us from the one thing that's going to solve our problem, which is mass organization and our ability to come together and organize against the system and create something better. So it's important to understand that. And this is why when they consistently engage in these movies, whether it's Queen and Slim or Selma, for example, and that movie Selma, I believe that's an Ava DuVernay movie, because a lot of we're confused. We think, again, tokenism, well, it's an African involved in producing it, so we have to support it. No, I don't. Who made that deal? I don't have to support that. I support what's truth and justice. I don't care who's making it. So, this is another movie that illustrates this attack against our militancy, because in that movie, for those of you that saw it, there is a scene in that movie. It's a disgraceful scene. And what the scene depicts is when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to jail in Alabama. When he went to jail, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, becoming much more militant and moving farther towards African nationalism, invited Malcolm X to come to Selma, Alabama in early February 1965, just days before Malcolm was assassinated, to speak to them, because they were heavily influenced by the ideas of Malcolm X. And a lot of the people in SNCC were moving farther away from the ministers and Dr. Martin Luther King and more into the realm of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. And the message he was talking about African internationalism, Pan-Africanism, and African militancy, and anti-capitalism, and pro-socialism. They were hearing that message in SNCC. So they invited Malcolm to come speak there in Selma. And so in that movie, Selma, that you saw, they have a scene in there where the person depicting Malcolm X drives up. and they have two Negroes there who supposedly represented the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was Dr. King's organization. And these two idiots in the film, they say, "What's that Negro doing here?" And so the inference there is that the event was their event, and somehow Malcolm was crashing the event. That's the inference. And immediately after that, the character depicting Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, comes out and berates the Malcolm X character for showing up there. So if you don't know the actual history, the inference given to you consciously and unconsciously, whether you're conscious of it or not, this is, if you haven't studied it, this is all you know about it. So it's going to influence your subconscious. So the inference provided to you in that scene is that Malcolm was not supposed to be there. It was a SCLC event, not a SNCC event. And Malcolm was not supposed to be there. And that Coretta Scott King didn't want him there. So what that does is it discredits whatever message Malcolm X came there to deliver. That's what that does. And that's exactly what the intention is for having that scene in the movie, because nothing that I just described in that scene is accurate in real life. And if you want to research it again, we study you all. So we're not just expressing opinions. We study this stuff. So if you want to study it and you want to, don't take anything that we're telling you for heart, just assume that we're telling you a lie and you study it yourself. But if you want to do that, Coretta Scott King was interviewed on ABC television. It's on YouTube. Y'all watch all them other ridiculous YouTube videos. Watch something that's really giving you some real history. So this particular interview with Jackie Shearer, she asked Coretta Scott King what happened when Malcolm X showed up in Selma. And there were plenty of witnesses to this. So it's not like this is just solely Coretta Scott King's account of what happened. There's all types of documented witnesses who observed this, and Coretta Scott King correctly explains to Jackie Shearer that she was not even there when Malcolm X arrived, and she was not even there to hear most of his speech. She didn't arrive there because she was tending to her husband being in jail, and so she arrived there after, when Malcolm X was closing his remarks, when he was finishing his speech, when he had finished the speech where he talked about the house slave and the field slave. She wasn't even there to hear that. And she said that when she sat down on the stage, he came off the rostrum and sat down next to her, and he leaned into her and said, "I'm just here to help." And she said to him, "Thank you." And this is the only conversation that Malcolm X and Coretta Scott King ever had. So this dramatized scene in the movie, was just fabricated, was not true. And I understand, like, a lot of you say, well, it's a movie, it's not. But the problem is that we don't study our history. So as I said, a lot of people see that and they think that that's actually happened, even if they're not conscious that that's what they think. That's what they think. And even more insidious and more unconscious is that it delivers a real subtle message that, yeah, militancy is not a good idea. These people push you and it's not a good idea. So it's the same type of message in the Black Panther movie. I know a lot of you love the Black Panther movie. You won't study the Black Panther Party, but you love the Black Panther movie. And in that movie, the Michael B. Jordan character, Killmonger, that's supposed to be the revolutionary. And in that movie, Killmonger is, just brutal and ruthless towards the women and the people that are supposedly in the movement with him. This is another subtle message that they portray about revolutionaries. The revolutionaries are inhumane and selfish and individualistic and anti-people, and are just really just revolutionaries because they're angry. And the revolution is just a way for them to exert their anger, express their anger. And so why would you want to be a part of something like that? Because everybody knows nothing positive can be sustained through anger. So again, the subtle suggestion is that you don't want to do that. You don't want to be militant like that. You want to be like the Chadwick Boseman Black Panther character that doesn't offend anybody. Everybody loves them and just finds a way to get along with even the CIA agent in the movie. And anybody that knows anything about Africa knows there's no possible reality on any material realm that makes anybody connected with the CIA a hero in Africa. That's just extremely offensive to those of us who know the history of destabilization the CIA has carried out in Africa and around the world. But this is what these movies are designed to do, to send that message to us that, hey, you know, this is not something that we need to engage in, these militant activities. This is not for us. And then another core element of this message is, and I know this is going to hurt folks, but redirecting us. Because if you tell people, well, militancy is not good, then what's the alternative? Well, the alternative that they're providing to us is that our only real alternative is to pursue entering the capitalist system through the petty bourgeoisie pathway. You know, get an education, get a college degree. And we're not talking bad against college degrees. You know, we showed you an introduction. Shakura very soon will be the first person in my family ever to become a doctor when she finishes her PhD. And I myself have an advanced degree. I'm a slave with a master's degree. So we're not against education. We just think education should be used to liberate the people, not to advance people, and people to use education to advance themselves individually. Because African people, we only have education because our people fought collectively to allow us to have the right to get the education. And they didn't do that so that you can get an education and just buy yourself a big house and car and forget about the masses of your people. You would not even have that opportunity if the people who struggled for you to have it didn't struggle for it. And they did that because they knew we had to have it, because they wanted you to use your skills and information to advance our people towards liberation. So we're not against education. We're just against bourgeois class elevation. And so this is the focus in Hollywood, is to push us to pursue only that, only integrating ourselves as petty bourgeoisie into the bourgeois capitalist system. That's what we're supposed to do, you all. And that's the message they have for us. And so this is why celebrities are so highly touted in this society. This is why the only Africans you know are Tyler Perry, Jay-Z, Beyonce. These are the only people that most of you know anything about. You don't know anything about the people that actually made a contribution to make your lives better, other than the sanitized versions that they give you about Dr. King and Rosa Parks and whoever else. We don't even understand that Rosa Parks didn't just sit on that bus accidentally. She was a field secretary for the NAACP, and she had been involved in movement work for more than a decade in Alabama before the bus boycott in 1955. That was a planned action when she sat down, and she was not even the first person to do that. There were a number of African women before her, not just one more African woman, as is commonly miscommunicated. There were several African women that came before her who were willing to engage the racist bus practices in Montgomery, Alabama. She was just like the fourth or fifth one that was organized around to make that happen. So, you know, it's important that we understand this, because if we don't, if we're confused about this, then we'll operate under this real subtle message that the only thing we need to do is just figure out how to get more of us into the system. And if we can do that, our problems will somehow magically go away. Well, we're here to tell you that if you expand your horizon and your vision just a little bit, what you'll find is that the American capitalist system is based completely on exploiting Africa's resources. The American capitalist system is based exclusively on exploiting Africa's resources. And so even if all 50, 60 million Africans within the US were able to rise up economically and have economic prosperity, the only way this could happen is at the expense of the masses of African people, all over the world, particularly in Africa, and all other people on earth. That's the only way that can happen. Now, some of you are cool with that. Some of you don't have a problem with that. You don't care about that. All you care about is your ability to advance on an individual basis. But We are speaking about this from the standpoint of justice and the standpoint of correcting the wrongs in history and the standpoint of representing the masses of people who have been oppressed and exploited historically, and creating a world where children have the right to free education, free healthcare, of quality of life, so that they can grow up and be contributing members to a society that allows people to meet their full potential based on the opportunities without this systemic discrimination. And so for those of us who want that, there's no way we can be confused about what this system represents. And there's no way we can be satisfied with just a few token numbers of us advancing in positions anywhere. There's no way we can be satisfied with that. You know, Michelle Obama, bring our girls home, and her husband's bombing the hell out of Somalia, killing our girls. That's okay for a lot of you. That's not okay with us. And we don't care how mad you get about us talking about it. We're going to tell the truth, because that's what needs to happen. That's the problem we have now. All of us are walking around in Disneyland and pretending that everything about this system is okay as long as a few of us can get into it and get some money and do that. No, we want to blow all of that. We're not trying to get no money from this system. We're trying to destroy it and create something better. And so we acknowledge, recognize, and talk about the fact that the institutions of this society, like the entertainment industry, are here to confuse us and to make sure we stay on the track they intend for us to stay on, which is nothing except support for this capitalist system. So you are supposed to be petty bourgeoisie, and do that. But our message to you is to reject that and to use your education and your skills. Doesn't matter whether you went to college. There's a lot of our people that have plenty of quality education that didn't go to college, and there's a lot of our people that went to college that can't even tell you what a glass of water tastes like. So it's not about that. Intelligentsia means that you have ideas and skills that can benefit humanity. So what we want you to do is reject petty bourgeoisieism and use your skills to advance the masses of people towards liberation. And for us, that means Pan-Africanism. Okay. So how do we combat Hollywood propaganda? How do we do that? Like, what do we need to do to combat Hollywood propaganda? You know, this movie, A Night in Miami, just came out. And, you know, again, this subtle message of don't embrace militancy, you know, very subtle message. Even in that movie, it was there. And again, if you don't know the history, you missed it. You just were swept up in it. There's no way that can't happen unless you know the history. We know the history, so we're never going to be swept up in what Hollywood puts out. But they show you it. You look at the end of the movie. You should do this for yourself. You look at the end of the movie when the credits come up. I'm not spoiling the movie for you. I'm talking about after the movie's over, when the credits start to show. And if you look at the movie, what happens is they tell you, when they get to Malcolm X, they tell you the history. You know how the movies tell you this, what happened to the people after the movie. So this was the night, you know, Cassius Clay, then Muhammad Ali, won his first boxing title, February 25th, 1964. And these four friends, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, the football player then, and Sam Cooke, the singer, they had a friendship, and though they spent that night in the hotel. And that was true. That did actually happen. But because we don't know what happened, three of them are deceased now, and Jim Brown, just until recently, never talked about it. So we didn't know. So what Regina King's movie has done is attempt to fictionalize what happened in that hotel room. The issue that we have with it, great movie, the acting, everything was great, you know, entertainment wise, it was great. And I know most of us, that's all we care about is the entertainment. But some of us are concerned about the history and what our people are taking from this stuff. And so what our concern is again, this subtle message of defanging our militancy as a people. And that was illustrated in the end credits. As I mentioned, what happened is that if you look at the end credits, they tell you about Muhammad Ali, what happened to him, and Jim Brown. And most of you know that already, so we won't repeat it. But when they get to Malcolm X, they give you a quote from Malcolm that he gave on February 19th, 1965. And then from that, the next thing they put on the screen is that he was assassinated 2 days later, February 21st, 1965. And then they talk about Sam Cooke. But what was interesting is they talk about Sam Cooke's business acumen and how he was able to develop his own record label, which he did, which, you know, that's uncommon even today. for any musician, not to mention an African in the mid 60s. So that's, that's definitely noteworthy, but they don't tell you anything about what happened to Sam Cooke in the credits, which was interesting to me because if you don't know, Sam Cooke was shot and killed too, like Malcolm, but he was actually shot and killed 2 months before Malcolm was. And the conditions under which Sam Cooke was shot and killed were, we don't know exactly what happened. We talked about this before, but what we do know is an African woman shot him, a hotel manager, and she did so because she said that he was about to to commit sexual assault against a young woman. So again, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. That's what she said. That's what the young woman said. I believe it because I don't have any reason not to. But it's interesting that they didn't tell you that in the credits. And the reason why they didn't tell you that is because that wasn't essential to the message that they were delivering. The message that they were delivering is, again, if you stand up against us like Malcolm did, because whatever Sam Cooke was doing, he wasn't killed like Malcolm was because he was standing up for our people. So the message, the subtle message there is that, well, if you do that, this is what will happen to you. Although this man was, for all we know, killed based on some nonsense. So again, that subtle defanging our militancy. So this is why, the way we deal with this, you all, is we're the ones that have to tell our history. We can't rely on Hollywood or anyone else to do it. And this is what Shakur and I here, and our comrades Onya Samwu and Monica and all of our good All African People's Revolutionary comrades do every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time out of our New Mexico chapter, and what our organization does all over the world. We're trying to tell our history because we have to tell it. If we don't tell it, it's not going to be told for us. These people have no interest. Your slave master is never going to give you the information you need to liberate yourself. And a lot of you truly believe that that's how liberation is going to come, that we can just somehow finagle what we need out of the slave master to get it. And you don't have one example where that's happened. So we're the ones that have to tell our history, number one. And it's important for us to talk about our existence here from a holistic standpoint, that we're complete human beings with dignity. We talked about Sekou Touré last week and how important the message of dignity was to him and how he imparted that message on the SNCC organizers and Malcolm X. And he toured the Southern US in 1959 and imparted that message on our people there. And this question that we're full human beings, because if you see yourself like that as a full human being, then you will understand that you have every right to exist on this earth just like everyone else, and you have every right to exist in a dignified fashion just like anyone else. So you would never let someone tell you, well, the only thing you could ever do is be nonviolent. You saw on January 6th, these people don't believe that about themselves. So why do you need to believe that? That puts you if you're standing there with a bully and the bully's attacking you with everything they got, and you sitting there talking about, well, I'm not, whatever they do, I'm not going to hit them back. You're in for a bad evening. The only thing that makes sense is that you have the right to do whatever you have to do to get this person off of you. And that doesn't just apply on an individual basis. That's clearly a collective principle. That's the first rule of self-preservation. So the only reason why we fall for this trick that's propagated by Hollywood, that all we need to ever do is turn the other cheek, is because we don't really see ourselves as full human beings with complete dignity. And I don't need you to admit that, because I know we don't want to. It's too painful for us to be honest and admit that we see ourselves as the caricatures that has been constantly pumped into us 24/7, 365 days a year, that we don't have that right as a human being to demand that we be respected. Well, we're here to tell you that we do, and that we need to do that. And we need to see ourselves as full human beings. And our history, if we study it, will validate that for us. And then we have the right, that, as I stated, we have a right to exist and build ourselves by any means necessary. Like, we don't have to, we have no obligation to exist in this society in a way that's acceptable to the people who are upholding the system that's oppressing us. We have no obligation to do that. And in fact, we should militantly fight against doing that. We should want to make people uncomfortable in this society. We're uncomfortable. That's been my saying my whole life. I'm gonna make you uncomfortable like I'm uncomfortable. We should adopt that policy. What is this thing where we're nobody is doing anything to respect us and make us feel comfortable. We do everything to make everybody comfortable. We don't want any conflict. You got conflict. You got, guess what? You got conflict the moment you came out of the womb in this backward society. So don't blame people like me. I'm not creating the conflict. What I'm doing is preserving my sanity. Frantz Fanon talked about this, you all, in black mass, white mass, and in The Wretched of the Earth. He talked about the psychology of oppression. And so we understand that here. And I understand that the best dignity I can have right now is sitting in this public place like I'm doing and talking truth. I don't care if these people here, that's their problem. They can't handle truth. I'm here to tell the truth. They don't have any, they're not concerned about what I got to hear every day. So we have to, the minute we develop that kind of dignity is the minute we start to get free, you all. There's no question about that. And we have to recognize that none of this can happen on an individual basis. And we're never going to get free on an individual basis. We're never going to deconstruct this system on an individual basis. We have got to get people engaged and involved in organizations. We've got to get people working collectively. There is no such thing as Hollywood where superheroes save the day. The only way the day is ever going to get saved is when we decide to come together and work to engage and confront this system in an organized fashion and bring it to its knees so that we can move forward and build something together. So everybody has to be in an organization working to do that. Our problem we have now is all of us talk. All of us know how to bump guns. All of us got opinions, but most of us are not involved in any organizing work to advance our people. So intellectual masturbation is huge among our people. It's huge among all people. Everybody likes to talk and let you know, and you all that are involved in an organization, you know that's true because you're in meetings all the time. And all these people come to the meeting and they love to tell you what they think needs to happen. Well, this should happen. We should be doing this. You should be doing that. You should be doing this. And then when it comes to the point in the meeting where you're talking about how you're going to make those things happen, it's always crickets. Those same people who were talking so much 5 minutes earlier about what needs to happen, now all of a sudden they don't have any time. Now all of a sudden they got to go. Now all of a sudden they got a family and they can't do anything. So this is why we can never move. This is why we don't move forward. So if we think that if we believe that we need to do something to change this system, we have got to be engaged in an ongoing process to make that happen. We're not going to define what that looks like for you. You do that. Because if we do that, he said I got to join his organization. And he's talking about capitalism. I love capitalism. And you don't even know if your lights are still going to be on when you get back to your place, but you love capitalism. So that's fine. We're not even going to have that argument with you. We're saying whatever way you manifest, you and someone else, and at least one other person working in the same direction, that's what your organization looks like. You got to do that. So again, we just want to close by saying that the purpose of these sessions are to, touch on these issues and hopefully get people inspired enough to pursue them more, to get a better understanding of what is being discussed here. But also a point of these sessions, the primary point, is to push organization. So again, we want to encourage you, if you're African, join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have a program called Work Study. You meet every 2 weeks, you read, and you struggle around ideas with other Africans. And this is an essential thing that needs to happen. And the beautiful thing is that you can participate in our work study process, and then you don't have to be a member of the APRP, because a lot of you ain't going to be able to make it. I'm going to tell you that right now. You just ain't going to be able to hang with it because you just don't have that kind of discipline and dedication in your life. And that's just, I'm sorry, that's just subjective. You can develop it. Many of you will develop it. And I actually believe eventually the majority of us will develop it. But for right now, just make a commitment to get involved in a work study process and commit your life to learning about your people and what's going on. I mean, no one who ever does that regrets it. It's just like working out. It's always good. So do that. Join the APRP. If you don't want to join the APRP, join Black Alliance for Peace, join the Ujima People's Party, join Black Hammer, join Cooperation Jackson, join the Malcolm X grassroots movement, join the the Republic of New Africa, join the Universal Negro Improvement Association, join any organization working for our people, join the Nation of Islam, join any of them working for our people. We're not going to tell you which one. We're just going to tell you you need to be in some organization working for our people. And if you're not in an organization, we don't even want to hear what you got to say, because you don't even believe enough in what you're saying to make it come into existence. So why would I want to listen to it? But if you're in an organization, I'll listen to what you got to say, because that tells me you're serious about making it happen. So do that. And then look at these sites that have information from the African revolutionary perspective. Go to our APRP-intl.org site, and you can inquire about joining the APRP. And there's also articles and information there. Please do that. And I have a blog, a betterworld.me, and it has all of these videos there. If you want to go back, you want someone to see it. You know, if you want to say, hey, man, this dude and his daughter on there, they are absolutely insane. You got to see this for yourself. Then you can go to a betterworld.me and you can look at all of these videos. We have them going back about 40 of them that we were able to capture on video. So you can see all of the topics that we've covered. And if you ever miss a week, you can always go there and look at the video after the fact. Okay. And then hoodcommunist.org. I write for that outstanding site with Africans from other wonderful militant revolutionary organizations. And I work on the editorial board. I'm struggling to contribute there and look forward to continuing to do that and contribute there. And so, you know, we ask you to go there. This is wonderful information from the revolutionary African perspective, and you need to have it. And then we just want to tell you to join us next week, February 7th, when we're going to talk about how Africans shape world technology today. We're going to talk about that, the things that you use every day today that you don't even realize where you thought that it was Apple or somebody like that. But we're going to talk to you and demonstrate to you how, no, that's us. They gave that to you, like us and the indigenous people gave you so much of what you use today. So we're going to talk to you about that. And we want to thank you again for joining us today. 50 weeks straight of doing this. We really, Shakur and I enjoy this so much. We put so much work into it, like our comrades in New Mexico, our comrades all over the world put work into the work that we do. And we continue to do it. We're honored to do it. And so we appreciate you. We love each and every one of you. We want to wish you a very good and wonderful rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never. Stay strong, you all. Join an organization. Smash patriarchy.